B1 Plus. Listening 2.
I'm pleased to have with us in the studio Tom Johnson, who has just published a book called Really Amazing Coincidences. Welcome, Tom. Hello. How would you define a coincidence? It's basically two or more similar things which happen in the same place or at the same time without any obvious connection. In a group of 6 people, if 2 have the same birthday, that is a coincidence. I remember when I started university in 2005, 8 of my classmates were called Thomas, like me. That's a coincidence. That's a lot of Thomases. Now, the cover of your book shows the sun and the moon. Why is that? They represent a perfect coincidence. From the Earth, the apparent size of the sun is exactly the same as that of the moon. The sun is obviously much larger, but because it is much further away, it appears exactly the same size. This allows eclipses to happen. The moon can completely cover the sun. Interesting. What's the best series of coincidences you know about? The most famous one is the connections between President Lincoln and President Kennedy. Some are more amazing than others. Lincoln was elected to Congress in 1846. Kennedy was elected in 1946. Lincoln became president 14 years later in 1860. Kennedy was elected in 1960. Anything else? Obviously, they were both assassinated. Yes, both shot in the head on a Friday. Lincoln in 1863 and Kennedy in 1963. Both killers had names with 3 parts: John Wilkes Booth and Lee Harvey Oswald. I didn't realize that. Didn't their secretaries have something in common as well? Yes, Kennedy's secretary was called Lincoln, and Lincoln's Kennedy. Both men were succeeded by men called Johnson, which is my name as well. And my name is Clinton. What a coincidence! True. There are a lot more details, but you'll have to read my book. Of course. What about twins? There seems to be a lot of stories in your book about twins. Yes, there are. One story is about American twins separated at birth who met up when they were 40. They were both named James. Both had also married women called Linda, but not only that, they had divorced them and married second wives. Both called Betty, and both had called their sons James Allen, with slightly different spelling. That's amazing! We just have time for a couple more. Tell us about Violet Jessup. Well, Violet was on the Titanic when it sank in 1912. It was on its first voyage and was hit by an iceberg. 4 years later, in 1916, she was working on the Titanic's sister ship, the Britannic, and that sank too. On the Titanic, about 1,500 people drowned, but only about 30 on the Britannic, which had many more lifeboats than the Titanic. What was the other coincidence about a book and the Titanic? In 1898, an American writer published a book called The Wreck of the Titan about a ship called Titan, which sank on its first voyage after hitting an iceberg with the death of over 2,000 passengers. Similar name and story. That's a coincidence. 14 years before it happened. Wow! Let's end with a happier story. Someone told me a lovely story recently. A friend of mine, Juliet, had been on holiday in Italy in 1995 and taken a photo of a monument. Years later, she was showing the photos to her new husband, and she suddenly recognized him in the background of the photo at the monument. He had been on holiday at exactly the same time in exactly the same place. A perfect coincidence. And before you ask, no, he wasn't called Romeo. Thanks, Tom, for a fascinating chat. The book is published.